At Japan's Tokyo Game Show convention back in 2007, the gameplay of Ninja Gaiden 2 was shown for the first time. Just before revealing this first ever footage of his new project, game director Tomonobu Itagaki said, "Now please enjoy the world's best action game running on the world's most powerful hardware." You just have to respect the balls on this guy. He knew exactly what product he was trying to build, and he did not shy away from sharing this opinion with the world. And as it turns out, he would later be basically proven correct. Anyway, as I'm sure most of you know, Ninja Gaiden is back. Team Ninja has announced a collaboration with Platinum Games to finally produce Ninja Gaiden 4, which is actually coming out later this year. They also, of course, shadow dropped this new remaster of Ninja Gaiden 2, which will be the main topic of this video. I'm trying not to get ahead of myself here, but I'm hopeful that this news could potentially indicate some kind of a resurgence of 2000s era action game design, or something like that, you know. At the very least, I hope it can maybe nudge the current regime onto a slightly different path. Like, is anyone else getting tired of the Souls-like meta that has monopolized action games over the past decade or so? I can't be the only one. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a big From Software enjoyer, but this current meta, the inevitable Souls template that almost every third-person action game tends to cling to, is starting to become a little tired, in my opinion. Even Miyazaki himself can't seem to circumvent this trend he created with Demon's Souls, as all of his games since then are pretty much just iterating on that original concept, where almost all of the true innovation was born. Since 2009, there's been very little exception to this sort of design across From Software's catalog, and it feels like the rest of the games industry is pretty much along for the ride. They did switch it up a bit with Sekiro, but at this point, that game's mechanics have also been fully assimilated into the Souls-like machine, right? So what's really the difference, you know? It's all become just another aspect of From Software's template, which is now everyone's template. I think we desperately need some kind of a shake-up here, and I'm hoping the return of Ninja Gaiden might be able to shift the trajectory just a little bit. So hopefully Ninja Gaiden 4 is a great game, and a lot of people buy it. For the time being, we have this new version of NG2, and I must say it's been a lot of fun revisiting a game I haven't touched in many years. Something that really represents a different era, and something with maybe a more arcade-like design sensibility than much of what's available today. NG2 Black is not perfect, but it's gotten me back into the series in a big way, and I think it's helping to generate a lot of hype for the future of Ninja Gaiden. So, before we get started, a quick note on my history with the series. Prior to this new remaster, I had only played the vanilla versions of Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2 back in the day on the original hardware, and I've just recently played a little bit of NG3 Razor's Edge with a friend. So, I don't have the Master Collection, I've never played NG1 Black or the Sigma versions. Back in the day, I played the games at a pretty casual level without ever understanding them in any depth. You know, I never played them on the harder difficulty settings or anything, but there was still something in there that I found deeply compelling. I played the first game a lot more than the second, and I used to call it one of my favorite games back when I was a teenager. Since the end of the 2000s, I kind of lost touch with these games, and I don't think I ever played them again. So I was essentially starting from scratch with NG2 Black, and I had to play a lot to really figure out what I was doing. I was hoping to become a pro with this game before producing the video, but alas, I didn't quite achieve that. You know, I guess it's been a slower process than I was expecting. However, I did clear the game on Master Ninja a couple times, and I have also completed the game on Mentor without dying. So I think I'm at least decent enough for the purposes of this video. In preparation, I also replayed the original Ninja Gaiden 2 on my Xbox 360. I played through it once on the Warrior difficulty setting as a refresher, and just to make sure I had a more complete understanding of the game. Underneath the new UE5 graphical presentation, NG2 Black seems to be just the Sigma version with a few adjustments, hence remaster. Itagaki has long since left Team Ninja. He was not involved in either of these versions, and they are very different from the original game. There are a ton of pretty substantial differences, even concerning things that directly affect gameplay, and I think the newer versions are inferior in a lot of ways. But all things considered, the fundamental content of what makes Ninja Gaiden 2 fun, the combat foundation itself, is largely the same across all versions. And I'm not interested in doing any kind of in-depth comparison between them. I really just want to discuss what makes these games so interesting and so fun to play, and I'm going to be using this new version for my critique. Anyway, for those unfamiliar, Ninja Gaiden 2 is a video game about killing things and not much else. It's often referred to as a character action game, which is a designation I like, but it is kind of a nebulous term, in my opinion. I suppose NG2 could be described as an action-adventure title, but it's really more of a pure action game than that label would suggest. For this sequel, Team Ninja eliminated most of the quote-unquote adventure elements that were present in the first game so as to focus on the core of Ninja Gaiden's gameplay, which of course is combat. And for the later iterations of NG2, including this new version, the game has been streamlined even further, to the extent that it totally lacks any ambiguity about where to go or what to do at any point. I think there's probably going to be a fair number of people who won't fully understand Ninja Gaiden 2's appeal because it doesn't feel like modern action-adventure games generally do on a mechanical level, and it really takes a lot of effort to fully grasp the game's expectations for the player. It also lacks a modern third-person camera system, and as I was just saying, it's an uncommonly straightforward experience as well. Like, it doesn't have any kind of RPG progression or loot economy or an intricate world to explore or any of this kind of stuff. It has extremely linear level design with a strict focus on action gameplay. It's pretty much just combat encounters for 8 to 10 hours straight with almost nothing else in between. So in some sense the game can feel sort of alien compared to how most modern video games are typically designed, right? For the uninitiated, Ninja Gaiden 2 might feel overly repetitive, or perhaps like it's simply missing something. And I think this is because Itagaki and Team Ninja just had a more traditional, more old-school conception of what a video game is. It's also mechanically rooted in the style of 2D fighting games, which require a lot of practice and know-how, right? This isn't intended as a game you merely complete once or twice and then move on. It's something you're supposed to play through many times and practice for many hours. This is what Itagaki expects. You know, most AAA games today are designed to simply be consumed, like one might consume a movie or a TV series. In contrast, the intended experience of Ninja Gaiden 2 is more like learning to play a musical instrument, where it requires a lot of effort up front to even develop a basic level of competence with the game, and it only becomes more and more satisfying the more you play it and the deeper your understanding becomes. So this kind of places the game in a certain arcade-like niche that may not appeal to a super general audience. And I don't mean to say that this is some kind of ultra hardcore gameplay experience that the normies just are unable to comprehend, right? I actually think it's really accessible if you start on Path of the Acolyte. I just think most people will stop playing before they discover how fun the game really is. Many people today want immediate gratification. You know, they don't want to have to complete a game 3 or 4 times in a row simply to reach the point where they're just beginning to understand how the game is meant to be played. But that's pretty much what this game demands, and for the players who enjoy that sort of thing, this is one of the best games you can play. The core gameplay of Ninja Gaiden 2 Black is all about fighting groups of enemies. It actually might be more accurate to say it's about trying to survive against groups of enemies. So the combat structure and all of its mechanics have been specifically designed to enable the player to fight many opponents simultaneously. To facilitate this, the game features an incredibly deep combat system with a ridiculous amount of options available in any given situation, and this is in large part what makes the game so satisfying and worthwhile to get into. There's a very high skill ceiling in this game, which personally I am nowhere near the top of. Anyway, the player's ultimate goal is to learn to use as many of the various techniques and mechanics as he can, and learn how to string them together to be as effective in combat as possible. That's really where the fun comes from. So the basic moveset has a light attack, strong attack, block, jump, and dodge, as well as various supplemental ranged options like the shuriken, bow, and ninpo, which are powerful magic attacks that are generally used for crowd control. There's also a lot of other moves and context-sensitive actions nested within this basic moveset, and a lot of it can be combined as well. So all these fundamentals can be kind of extrapolated out across tons of different combos and functions and situational techniques that can empower the really practiced players with almost limitless options in any given scenario. The general style of combat is pretty fast-paced, and you can kind of lean more towards offense or defense depending on your playstyle and skill level. The game has tutorials for a lot of the basic moves, but it really does nothing to teach the player how it all fits together or how to generally conduct oneself during the flow of combat. So I wanted to shed some light on how this game actually works. Much of the following material will actually function quite well as a guide for new players, as it has a lot of important information that you may not find contained within any other single video. At the same time, it's not going to be exhaustive, and it may not necessarily have the clarity of a dedicated guide, as that isn't really my goal here. I also wanted to point out that some of what I'll be describing in this video represents a distinct method of play, and it's not the only viable one out there. There are really good players who are able to totally ignore some of these things and still play very successfully. But I suppose you really have to first learn the rules in order to break them, so to speak. Anyway, the first things you really want to get used to are blocking and dodging. The block is very powerful and completely negates damage from most melee attacks, so you're going to be doing it a lot. The dodge mechanic is crucial as well, and it isn't necessarily used in the way you would typically use it in a Souls-like, for example. It does have iframes built in, but most of the time you'll want to use it more as a tool for positioning rather than as a method of iframing attacks. In most cases, you want to dodge away from attacks to create space rather than through them, though there are of course exceptions to this. It's also frequently used to dash towards enemies to help close the distance and get some damage in, so you'll be dodging towards enemies just as much as dodging away from them. To perform the dodge, you need to be blocking. So while blocking, you flick the left thumbstick to dodge in your desired direction, and it can even be followed up with a jump, which is a really important point. So even though you cannot walk or run while guarding, you can dodge infinitely, and you can also dodge into a jump that can cover a lot of distance. This enables the player to be extremely mobile while holding the block button, which is something that all players will need to understand. There are a couple of reasons for this that I'm going to get into, the most obvious of which is that the player is generally surrounded by groups of aggressive enemies, so it's often simply necessary for survival. You will get hit constantly if you're not blocking. In fact, you'll actually want to buffer in your block during your attack strings. So start holding block mid-combo, and then Ryu will immediately block at the end of your attack animation, which can help prevent a lot of damage. As I was saying, you also want to get comfortable being mobile while holding block as well. If you simply stand still while blocking, flurries of enemy attacks can quickly break your guard, and enemies will also be more likely to throw out high damage, unblockable grab attacks if you remain stationary. So you can and should abuse the block button to a significant degree, but at the same time, you gotta stay mobile. You really need to take action. You'll either want to quickly set up an attack or create space between you and your enemies. Otherwise, your health bar can melt away in seconds. There is one final reason why learning to effectively move around while holding the block button is so crucial, and this is because of how it can facilitate the use of the ultimate technique, which is a foundational combat mechanic. The UT is simply performed by holding the triangle or Y button, which will charge up a devastating attack string that can absolutely shred enemies, and this technique can often be the difference between survival and death. There are two levels of charge, the first of which is referred to as an essence technique or ET, and you just charge longer to get the UT, which is much more powerful. The most basic way to implement the UT is to create the required space between you and your enemies, and then simply charge the attack while waiting for them to approach you. But this is often not the most effective way to go about it, because it's just slow, right? So there are two components that contribute to the UT's lack of speed, which are its startup animation and its lengthy charge time. Fortunately, both of these things can be completely eliminated in many situations with a little practice. The startup animation can be outright skipped by performing the UT on landing from a jump. So start holding triangle right as you make contact with the ground to greatly increase the speed of the attack. And then the charging of the attack itself can also be outright skipped by fueling it with available essence on the battlefield. So doing these two things together enables the player to perform an ultimate technique instantly, in many cases even when surrounded by enemies. This is definitely something you'll want to get comfortable with. When enemies are killed, they will drop essence, which are floating orbs that give you resources when collected. And, as I was just saying, absorbing essence while charging a UT will give you an instant charge. However, Ryu will automatically absorb essence as it appears, unless you are holding the block button, right? So this is where the always hold block strategy reveals its salient purpose. If you are able to effectively navigate a combat encounter while holding block, essence will simply float in the air and only be collected at the precise moment that you release the button. This can be used to perform UTs very tactically, and it even enables the player to kind of chain them together to absolutely annihilate large groups of enemies very quickly. Now, you don't have to technically play like this, but I think it's a really important foundation for the combat that must be understood by all players with any ambition of being decent at Ninja Gaiden 2. So if you're a new player, start practicing this stuff right away on your first playthrough, and you'll be setting yourself up to have a much better experience when you transition to the harder difficulty settings. As I've said, this not only keeps you much safer, but also allows you to deploy tactical UTs instantly pretty much whenever you choose. It does feel a bit weird restricting yourself to this unusual mode of movement at first, but I personally find it to be something that becomes really satisfying once it clicks, and I think it only enhances the depth and uniqueness of NG2's gameplay. So to build a little more on something I was just talking about, I want to discuss the essence system, which is a topic that goes a bit deeper than it appears to on the surface. So just to cover the basics, all standard enemies will drop essence when killed, and essence can also be found in chests. Yellow essence will give you money, blue will refill health, and red will refill ninpo charges. The yellow essence will be our main topic of discussion here, as not only is it used to upgrade your weapons and purchase vital healing resources throughout the campaign, but you can also manipulate the game to get a lot more of it, which is important to understand. First, I should point out that the length of your combo affects how much money you will receive from the essence dropped by an enemy. This starts at 10 or 20 hits, and I think the amount increases with each 10 hits and maxes out at 50. So higher combos equal more money. But then on top of that, killing enemies with an ultimate technique actually gives you a big multiplier on your essence as well. Killing enemies with an ET, the weaker version, gives you like 3 or 4x on collected essence, and a UT gives you 7x. So killing an enemy with a UT at a combo of 50 or more hits will give you dramatically more money than if you just kill an enemy with a normal combo of 7 hits or whatever. However, when you absorb essence while charging a UT, you will only get like 1/5 of the money it was originally worth, and absorbing red or blue essence in this way will do nothing. It will not heal you or replenish ninpo. Basically, the essence you absorb while charging a UT is kind of worthless. So you want to be considerate of how and when you are deploying your UTs, because you don't want to use up all your essence on the charge, right? You want to make sure you actually collect a decent amount of it, especially when you're hitting a really good multiplier. So the point is, essence can actually be farmed very effectively if you understand how to apply this stuff. If you're playing for money, as the good players call it, you want to always try to have a high combo when collecting essence and kill enemies with a UT whenever you can. The shuriken is extremely useful to help keep your combo going. So if you jump and then press circle, Ryu will toss 3 or 4 shurikens at the closest enemy, and you'll be able to keep the hits piling up between direct engagements. Now, this kind of seems like a lot, and it isn't something you need to obsess over or really even consider for your first couple runs through the game, but it becomes a really important consideration on Mentor, and especially on Master Ninja, where you will need as much money as you can get. If you really systematize it and make it a focus, you can have a huge stockpile of cash within just a few levels from the start of the game. In fact, some people use the first level as a farm to amass as much money as possible to put them at an early advantage for their run. So the essence system makes for an interesting metagame within the overarching gameplay system. It does reward UT spam too much, but overall I think it adds an interesting layer to the game. It kind of nests an additional reward system within the general combat, so it adds a little complexity there, and it can compensate the player quite a lot if he knows the details of the system and how to apply them during gameplay. You can focus on it or ignore it to whatever degree you like. You don't want to be overly concerned with this, in my opinion. You know, there's no need to be compulsive about it, but it's important to be aware that you can get more cash if you want it. You can have your weapons maxed out very quickly and always have money for consumables if you choose to optimize your combat for this. Another central property of the gameplay that must be understood is the delimbing mechanic for enemies. So whenever you strike an opponent, there's a chance you will sever one of their limbs. Once an enemy has been delimbed, they tend to become slower and more vulnerable, but they also become extremely dangerous. Like, they tend to abandon all self-preservation. For example, the ninja type enemies become much more likely to throw out high damage suicide grabs where they will try to kill the player with explosives. So you need to be wary of that when you approach them. Fortunately, once they're delimbed, enemies can be killed in a single hit by getting close and pressing the strong attack button. This is called the obliteration technique, and it adds a satisfying ingredient to the combat model, particularly given the extreme gore on display. I hate how most developers tend to shy away from gore these days. The game is for grown-ups, so what's the problem, right? Anyway, so once an enemy has been delimbed, you can always follow up with a one-hit kill. Somewhat counterintuitively, light attacks seem to have a higher chance to delimb than strong attacks, and certain attack strings appear to be better for delimbing than others. Square square triangle with the dragon sword is pretty useful for this early on. Certain weapons also appear to delimb at faster rates than others. For example, the Tonfa is an absolute monster in this area, especially when upgraded. So much of the time when fighting enemies in this game, you are essentially fishing for delimbs so that you can get the obliteration technique and finish them off. This is the most common way to kill enemies, and it's something you always want to be cognizant of during combat. If you leave delimbed enemies alive during a fight, make sure you don't forget about them, or they may make you regret it. In NG2 Black, I'd say the delimb rate feels a bit too low. Like, sometimes you'll be hacking away at a Vangelf or whatever, and like 25 hits in, they still haven't delimbed, which can get pretty frustrating, particularly on Master Ninja, where the enemies can kill you extremely fast. The delimb rate is actually one of the main areas where the original game differs from Black. The original has more encounters and a lot more enemies, but they have fairly low health and tend to delimb quickly. Black has fewer enemies, but they have more health, deal more damage, and their delimb rates feel much lower. I'd say both of these approaches are fun and generally work well, but some of the enemies in Black often do not delimb quickly enough. Of course, this doesn't prevent the game being fun by any stretch, but I think Team Ninja could have made the game more consistently satisfying by adjusting some of these values a little bit. Next, I'm going to discuss some basic techniques and a couple less obvious mechanics that all players should be aware of, and then I'll try to bring it all together. Please note that a lot of the following stuff works only on human-sized enemies. The most iconic and also one of the most useful combos in Ninja Gaiden is the Izuna drop, which is kind of an air combo into a grab that finishes by slamming your opponent's head into the ground. This move enables the player to isolate and deal big damage to a single target, and it can often kill your opponent outright with just one technique, so it's a really powerful move. It's relatively safe and can be applied in many different situations. So when you begin attacking an enemy, after pressing square, you press triangle to launch enemies into the air. So the combo is typically performed by pressing square, triangle, square, 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 triangle, though it can be executed in a couple different ways, and the required button combination can vary slightly from weapon to weapon. This technique is a real bread and butter sort of move that's important to keep in mind at all times. Another important move is the wind run, which is a homing jump that will automatically target enemies, which is very useful for positioning. To perform the wind run, you simply press the jump button and the light attack button at the same time. There's also a technique called wind path, where you can jump off the head of an opponent, which briefly stuns them and enables the player to set up a combo or a UT. This is achieved by jumping towards an enemy and pressing jump again in the air when you are inside the opponent's guard. This same setup is used for the guillotine throw, except you'll press jump and light attack simultaneously instead. This move is a powerful throw that has a lot of utility. It deals big damage when enemies are thrown into a wall and can even delimb them outright. Spamming this technique to some degree can also be effective when you're surrounded. I should also mention the counterattack. When enemies are attacking your guard, you can press square or triangle to interrupt your opponent's combo and turn it against them. The timing for this is pretty strict, but it's an important skill to have. Anyway, there are many more highly useful moves that I won't mention here. These are just a few that are important to have at your disposal. In addition to all this stuff, there's a ton of other mechanics under the surface that are never explained in-game at all. Like when your guard is broken, you can quickly release and press block again to reset your guard, which effectively enables you to block many attacks infinitely if you time it properly. The shuriken can be used to stun approaching enemies very reliably and set them up for an attack. It can also be used for animation canceling across various combos, most notably with the dragon sword. And there are all kinds of other cancels that can be performed as well. Additionally, there are many techniques and combos, such as the guillotine throw and obliteration technique, that reward the player with iframes. So Ryu is invincible during these attacks, and believe it or not, this is actually something that needs to be actively considered during combat when playing on Mentor and especially Master Ninja. The camera system itself, interestingly, can be used to manipulate enemy behavior. For example, facing the camera away from enemies will make them less likely to attack you and much more likely to miss with projectile attacks. There are just so many little intricacies like this to learn in this game. And the enemies themselves are also challenging to fight. They're aggressive, but also have strong defense, and they will often throw out the perfect attack to trip you up at precisely the most annoying moment. There's just a lot to consider here. It's the kind of thing that can potentially take someone thousands of hours to achieve true mastery, right? Add in the expansive lists of different techniques for each weapon, and it becomes clear that your work is really cut out for you here. There are 9 weapons, all of which are awesome, and each one provides a different playstyle with its own unique traits, utility, and moveset. Each one is impressively fleshed out with tons of different moves to learn. The sheer amount of inputs is staggering. You know, pressing triangle while standing still, pressing triangle while running, pressing forward and then triangle, holding triangle, spinning the left thumbstick in a 360 and then pressing triangle, etc. All of these variations will produce a different move, and there are a ton of different attack strings to learn, as well as special moves that are performed while in the air, while jumping off of a wall, while wall running, while doing a flying bird flip, etc. The options are endless. It feels like there are moves specifically designed for every possible situation, no matter how rare, and there's a lot of space for creativity. The players that are really able to internalize all this stuff, the players that know all the hidden mechanics, that are able to memorize a lot of techniques for each weapon and train their ability to throw out the perfect move at the right moment, can achieve a level of mastery over this game that can make it more satisfying to play than virtually anything else on the market. This is why Itagaki called Ninja Gaiden 2 the world's best action game, and it's why a lot of the hardcore fans agree with him. Personally, I am not remotely close to mastering this game, but even a pleb such as myself can readily appreciate the rare genius of this video game. So, is this the perfect action game? In many ways, yes, but there are some things I take issue with. For instance, I don't think the boss battles are that good. They are a little too repetitive, with some bosses being repeated several times throughout the game. And for some of them, it's very difficult to tell when there's an opening to attack. And the openings are often inconsistent. Like, the boss will randomly have iframes when it feels like they shouldn't, and sometimes even where they didn't seem to before. I think the combat system perhaps just doesn't apply particularly well to boss fights. And the bosses might have actually been too easy if you could just fight them as you fight normal enemies. I do enjoy these fights for the most part, I just don't think they are particularly good, especially given the high bar set by the general combat encounters. So the boss fights are a bit of a weak link, unfortunately. I also don't love playing as the girls. So there are 3 playable female characters, and each one has her own short mission that's been kind of shoehorned into the story ever since the Sigma version of the game. And while these women are certainly enjoyable to look at, I just don't particularly like playing their levels. In a vacuum, they are fun enough, but the girls are just not nearly as enjoyable to play as Ryu, and their missions tend to just feel like an inconvenience on repeat playthroughs. I do like the inclusion of these characters, but I wish they were confined to a separate mode and not forced into Ryu's campaign. I also have some issues with the Master Ninja difficulty setting. I think a lot of the enemy types here just have way too much health for how quickly they can kill you, and as I mentioned earlier, they often just refuse to delimb. This results in certain points of the game that just feel a little too annoying and haphazard. I'm sure this is a skill issue on some level, but sometimes it feels like you can't actually fight the enemies and you're forced to just spam UTs and Izuna drop because doing anything else is basically futile. And the Izuna drop itself feels underpowered here. There are too many enemies that can withstand 1 or sometimes even 2 Izuna drops, and this simply isn't fun and is not a good idea. The balance just feels imprecise, and Team Ninja definitely could have arrived at something a lot more consistently satisfying, probably with just a few adjustments. I've also experienced some pretty noticeable glitches, mostly visual stuff, but it's kind of unacceptable for some of this kind of stuff to exist in a new version of what's becoming a really old game at this point. Anyway, I could probably think of a couple more complaints, but it really doesn't matter all that much. In the end, the gameplay on offer here is exceptional, it's unique, and I think it's able to transcend all of the game's flaws. The visual aesthetic is also something I find to be really compelling. Black looks a little more generic than the original. You know, it's got a hint of that UE5 blandness, but nonetheless, it is a pretty game to look at, and I think the added realism does bring something valuable to the table. But yeah, on the whole, both versions look great. The animations and sound are excellent, and as I said earlier, I'm a big fan of the extreme gore as well. It also, of course, has plenty of voluptuous women draped in excessively revealing outfits, which is something that I personally support and think the industry needs more of. This is definitely the game to remind you what they've taken from us. It does come across a little absurd, like I guess this is what Team Ninja thinks a CIA agent looks like, right? Doesn't matter. In the world of Ninja Gaiden, this is the reality, and I'm here for it. And of course, just mechanically, Ninja Gaiden is really on another level compared to most 3D action titles. I've really just been scratching the surface here. It offers an enormous amount of diverse and engaging combat encounters, and equips the player with more tools than he could ever need. It promotes creativity and mastery, and it feels great to fucking kill things in this game. It's just a very fun game to play. It definitely requires a fair amount of work to unlock most of the fun, but that's really the point, right? This is not some kind of defect, it isn't an accident. In fact, I think it's something that all developers of action games should aspire to. So yeah, I highly recommend NG2 Black, as well as the original Ninja Gaiden 2. I highly recommend the first Ninja Gaiden for Xbox as well, which is a total masterpiece. I even recommend NG3 Razor's Edge, which is like an ultra cringe, corny game that is inferior to the other two in a lot of ways, but the action is still undeniably excellent. Some people even say it's the best of this series. The point is, start playing Ninja Gaiden. It's a great time to start with the advent of this new remaster, and you'll definitely want to hone your skills in time for the release of Ninja Gaiden 4 later this year. Anyway, that's going to be it for this one. Subscribe to my channel and write your thoughts about Ninja Gaiden in the comments section below. Thank you for watching.